Inside, which yeah, I think they're all films as well. I'm not aware that this has been turned into a film though. So, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky met in war-torn 1960s Israel. Both were gifted young psychology professors. Kahneman, a rootless son of Holocaust survivors who saw the world as a problem to be solved. Tversky, a voluble, instinctual blur of energy. Over the next 40 years, their friendship found expression in an extraordinary intellectual collaboration, one whose impact has been so profound and wide-reaching that today it affects the lives of us all, showing the ways in which the human mind errs systematically when forced to make judgments about uncertain situations. Kahneman and Tversky shed new light on how we make decisions. Their ideas revolutionized everything from big data to medicine, from sport to high finance, from how we are governed to how we spend. In The Undoing Project, Michael Lewis tells the story of how their unlikely friendship became one of the greatest partnerships in science, until tragically it started to unravel. So yes, it tells the story of these two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and that's the kind of human element that I mentioned, because as much as this talks a lot about their work and their studies in terms of these biases and errors that our minds basically make, as much as it goes into that side of things, it does tell their life story pretty much as well, which is pretty fascinating. And I think from memory they have this kind of frenemies situation going on where they're both incredibly clever and focused on their work, but I don't think they always agreed on stuff. So I think there was a bit of tension on that side of things as well as just kind of seeing how their lives evolved, and they end up moving to America and living there and stuff. So yeah, very different characters and personalities, but focused on understanding how we function as humans. And yeah, just all of their psychology elements. I'm sure that you'll have heard of different types of biases that we all exhibit, that we might not be aware of, and I think if you're aware of it, you can try and get yourself out of that. But things like recency bias, which is obviously like you're putting much more emphasis on something that happened more recently. Things like confirmation bias, where you essentially find the data in the world and your experiences that back up what your already established ideas are, which is quite a dangerous bias to have. I don't know if they're like properly covered in the book, but I did pull out a couple of examples. I think a lot of their work was related to economics as well, and they did quite a lot in terms of thinking about loss aversion and how you might frame something essentially that has the same outcome in two different ways, and people will go with the framing that's around loss aversion and risk aversion rather than like gains, maximizing gains, which is interesting. But yeah, I think I've found a couple of random examples. These are definitely probably not the best ones, but yeah, I was just flicking through. I mean, the first one is an optical illusion, which is the length of those two lines is exactly the same, like the middle bit. You just wouldn't think it because of how the rest of the drawing is, with the arrows going inwards versus outwards on the end. So yeah, fascinating stuff. Even now I look at that and I'm like, no, surely one of them is longer than the other. So this is a limousine, very fancy, were caught in the same traffic jam and arrived at the airport 30 minutes after the scheduled departure time of their flights. Mr. Crane is told that his flight left on time. Mr. Tees is told that his flight was delayed and just left 5 minutes ago. Who is more upset? So the situation of the two men is identical. Both expected to miss their planes, and they both did miss their planes. However, 96% of the test subjects said that Mr. Tees was more upset, who's the one whose flight was delayed. And the point is, like, the whole situation was pretty much exactly the same. They expected to miss it, they did miss it, nothing has changed, and yet everyone is understandably going to be more annoyed if you just miss your flight by 5 minutes, even though you still missed it. So that's like one kind of interesting thing to think about, and it's talking about like how close you are to being able to kind of undo and change something. So if you just miss your flight by 5 minutes, you feel like, oh, I could have just changed this or that, and that would have meant that I caught my flight. So yeah, a bit of a weird one. And then this one is kind of more around the loss aversion stuff. If someone is given, or if people in general are given the choice between just getting $100 for guaranteed, or a 50-50 shot at winning $200, then most people tend to say, I'll have $100 right now, please, thank you. So that's the kind of like a sure gain. However, if you give the choice a slightly different spin, and you have a sure loss of $100 or a 50-50 shot of losing $200, so it's kind of the same thing but reversed, most people will risk it and say, I don't want to for sure lose $100, so I'm going to risk that I might lose $200, and that's going to happen half the time. So yeah, that's the whole like loss aversion, risk aversion thing that I was talking about. So this is super fascinating. I think a lot of these experiments were done in the like 1980s, 70s and 80s. It's quite a long time ago now. I wonder if there's been anything more that kind of have experimented. I'm sure there's loads more in that space, but I believe that if you've heard of, in the UK, I think for a while at least, there was it called the So the description, the synopsis kind of said a lot about already the case for not using empathy to make large scale decisions, and things like around kind of charity and like government even level decisions. But to kind of recap on some of that, I think one of the things that wasn't really covered on the synopsis was the fact that in terms of empathy as well, you're very limited. Empathy is kind of a finite resource, and you can't really have empathy for 1,000 people all in one go. It's a very individual kind of thing. You really need to like sort of have yourself deeply thinking about this other person's situation, and it's really difficult to do that in terms of the human level for like 1,000 people. I think there are studies that showed that there's almost like a limit of you can really only feel empathy in one go for about 100 people, and after that it becomes less. So that's why we can kind of be quite numb to maybe the impacts of war when you talk about tens of thousands of people who are struggling or having a difficult time. If you just rely on your empathy, you're probably not going to necessarily react to that situation in the most favourable way. Whereas if you kind of rationalise it, then you're able to maybe react in a better way to something. So there's the kind of like the scale of empathy that's a problem. And then they talked about as well the fact that you are more likely to, or maybe only have empathy for people who are in your kind of in circle, who are in your sphere of the world, which can mean that you end up being biased against people's sex and gender and race, and things like that, religion. And I think that there's like a really fascinating example of that in the UK from more recent times, which is the response within the UK population to simultaneous things happening, one of them being the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and at the same time, pretty much, I think, within a year or something, there was also the withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan, which meant the Taliban came back into power, and a lot of people there who had like worked with Western governments and who had and this might be from Stalin, which is very ironic. Probably someone that did need more empathy, because we have to acknowledge that we still need empathy in the world. He said, the death of one is a tragedy, the death of millions is a statistic, which kind of goes back to that like law of numbers thing that I was talking about. So yeah, I think I loved this book because it was really challenging, a thought-provoking look at something that I would never have thought about. You would never have kind of, I think, come to these conclusions really yourself, but this brings out all these different studies and case studies and experiments, and it's, again, it just kind of reveals the biases in our psychology and night. But yeah, so we have quite a few. There are a couple I feel bad that I have forgotten. Maybe Jocasta. Maybe Jocasta is Oedipus's mother, who she accidentally marries him without knowing it's her son, and then they sleep together, and then does he kill? I can't remember, but yeah. Anyway, rambling. But basically, it's just a really great storytelling and unpicking, and a little bit of kind of scholarly analysis in there about, I guess, the sources and our understanding of them and our personal take on things as well. So I really like this book. Okay, now we're coming up to the ones that are like more recent, definitely more recent. I'm going to start with one I think I wasn't actually going to include necessarily, because this is kind of one of the honourable mentions. It wouldn't make my top 5, but I did really enjoy it, and that is Abroad in Japan by Chris Broad. And it says 10 years in the land of the rising sun. So why not? Let's read every single synopsis in here. When Englishman Chris Broad landed in a rural village in northern Japan, he wondered if he'd made a huge mistake. With no knowledge of the language and zero teaching experience, was he about to be the most quickly fired English teacher in Japan's history? Abroad in Japan charts a decade of living in a foreign land and the chaos and culture clash that come with it. Packed with hilarious and fascinating stories, this book seeks out to unravel one of the world's most complex cultures. Spanning 10 years and all 47 prefectures, Chris takes us from the lush rice fields of the countryside to the frenetic neon-lit streets of Tokyo, with blockbuster moments such as a terrifying North Korean missile incident, a mortifying experience at a love hotel, and a week spent with Japan's biggest movie star. Abroad in Japan is an extraordinary and informative journey through the land of the rising sun. So yeah, this is a very well written in the sense of it's easy to read and it's quite funny, and it really gets your kind of imagination going and transports you to Japan. It's really not like literary in any way. It's just decent, easy to read, good writing in that sense. And obviously it's very different because definitely the 3 I've shown you so far, maybe less so Pandora's Jar, but they all have an element of kind of critical thinking about them, talking about psychology experiments or like source material in terms of understanding the Greek women. Whereas this is just basically his memoir, really, in terms of how he went from a rash, random decision to sign up for a teaching placement in Japan to all of his discoveries, all of his adventures, and kind of it takes you on a journey with him around Japan. And I've never been. I think I would really like to. I have a doubt that I will ever get there, to be honest. But I think that it's so interesting, there's that word again, but to hear about someone's experience of just kind of landing there and acclimatizing to everything, including the weather and all the different cultural, the differences between England and Japan. And I just, like I say, I think he came across really well in it, and I just really enjoyed hearing about his story. So that is a little kind of honourable mention. And if guess it wasn't in the first edition of the book, but later editions, his kind of response to some of the criticism and some of the debate that he'd had with one other person in particular that was there. But yeah, I don't think you need to be into mountaineering necessarily to really enjoy this book, but for me it did make me more obsessed with mountaineering and wanting to learn about that. I guess it's high adrenaline, high stakes, but like a way of kind of connecting with the earth and, you know, the kind of beauty of the scenery. And there is something about kind of striving to go higher and to kind of push your body to the limits that is really fascinating. So yeah, can't recommend that enough. Absolutely top book. The penultimate book that I want to talk to you about is one that I literally read last month, and that is Everything is Tuberculosis. Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I feel like this book almost encapsulates everything that I've said already in terms of almost like what makes a good non-fiction book, because it has an author who has a great writing style, because he's written fiction books in the past and other works, so he has a great writing style, who is quite funny at times, so sort of feel like Abroad in Japan and Into Thin Air, also they both have like fantastic writing styles and not dense, even though this does cover some, you know, scientific stuff. It's not at all dry, it's not at all dense. So yeah, the writing style is incredible. It has the fascinating elements of the kind of scientific side of it, what tuberculosis is, kind of how it functions, the way that we've developed cures and preventative measures for it. It has the human storytelling aspect of it, because we get to hear about a couple of different people who sadly had TB, and you know, one in particular, Henry, is just, you know, you kind of fall in love with this and this person, this boy, teenager man, essentially, but yeah, you hear about various other people as well throughout, so it does a really good job of weaving together the scientific with the human impact. But this also has quite a broad, aside from the biology and science of it, it's quite a broad view on human history and human behaviour. So I feel like this kind of ties together loads of stuff that I liked about some of the other books as well. And yeah, I just think it was super fascinating, told me so much that I didn't know, in particular obviously about TB, but you know, the whole premise of this book, which I will read the synopsis for you of, is how understanding and going in depth on this one very specific disease and topic tells us a lot about human behaviour and human history and how we've got to this point in time. So let me read the synopsis. Tuberculosis has been entwined with humanity for millennia. Once romanticised as a malady of poets, today tuberculosis tuberculosis.